October is fast approaching, the fall just began, and I never knew that fall is actually the favorite season of so many people. I'm more of a summer girl, I like things hot, but fall has its benefits as well. So let's plan a fall bullet journal for all the weeks and let's get to it. Before I forget, like and subscribe. How do I plan my monthly and weekly logs? Well, here I have some templates of different layouts for the monthlies and for the weeklies, and usually I just consult these pages, pick a few that I like for the current month, and then I make sketches like this, which are very loose, just so that I know what will be somewhere. Like here I wrote fox and put just the boxes and the big circles so that I know this is the layout that I want. I also put it here for the cover, for the monthly, and here are my other weeklies. This is how I usually start because it's much easier to change things on this blank scrap paper than it is in my precious bullet journal. Sometimes when I'm not sure how something will look, like in this case, I wasn't sure what would be the best way to approach my lettering, and I made some tests, like this one, and this one. I tried 3 different outlines, and then I chose this sepia color, not the black and not the reddish brown. After sketching everything in, I traced over the letters with a sepia brown fine liner. I used Pitt pen fine liners because they're waterproof and juicy, and I like that their nibs are high quality. They don't sponsor me. I played with the letters a bit more this time and tried a kind of bubbly design, and I really like the end result. For the focal image, I chose this little fox cub as soon as I've seen the reference photo on Pinterest. It was just so cute. I first painted a base wash with watercolors, then on the next layer I added some texture with dry brushing. That means painting with very little water on your brush using very dry paint. It's great for fur texture, as you're about to see. Now I'm painting in the details on the face, the eyes and the snout, before I move on to the next layer with darker colors for the shadows and darker tones on the fur of her face. Yes, I've decided it's a female cub, don't ask me why. There is no way to determine gender by just looking at a cub, but I decided I'm painting a girl. Now I added another wash to the body to make it more voluminous and to vary the colors in her fur. Finally, I'm coming in with dry brushing for the fur texture. Here you can see the coloring in the real time. As you can see, it's a bit more time consuming than it might look in the speed paint. All of the weeklies took me 4 hours and a half, so about an hour each. But there is quite some painting on these spreads. Later I added some fur details with colored pencils on top. The letters are painted in ombre effect. I started at the top with ochre color, blended it into reddish brown and then to dark brown. The exact colors were, at the top, Raw Sienna by Windsor and Newton Cottman series, which looks like a transparent ochre to me. I blended this into English Red by Schminke, which is very similar to burnt sienna in other brands. And then into Sepia by Schminke, which is just a dark brown. It is quicker to paint more letters at once, so that is what I did. You just have to paint a bit faster so that your paint don't dry on the page before you come in with the next color. Lastly, I added some white highlights with Signo Uniball pen. I found out these highlights don't need to be exact. They can be on either side of the letter, since the letters are supposed to be round, so it looks good either way. It's not like painting a master study where you have to take care of where the light comes from. This is much more forgiving. My next page has a horizontal design with names of the days all spelled out, and the dates are written with a brown brush pen. Again, I outlined everything and went to town with my watercolors for the faces of different animals. Starting with the base washes as always and added details on top. I had a lot of fun with hedgehog quills. When you paint them, it's usually the easiest to pull the brush from the base of the quill to the top so that the brush stroke makes a nice tapered quill. If you want a softer look, paint them into wet paint and the edges will be a bit blurred. If you want very defined quills, paint them over the dry surface. The steps are exactly the same for the other animals as well, just the fur is a bit softer and shorter, so the brush strokes are shorter and thinner, and paint it into wet paint so that the appearance is softer. Before the fur details, however, it's a good idea to add the shadows if needed. If you're struggling where to put the shadows, they usually appear on every indented part, the valleys, wrinkles, around the eyes, ears, and so on. When painting in the face mask, remember to blend the colors because in general there are no hard lines between the parts, although the contrast can be quite obvious, like white to orange-brown in fox face. But at least for the base wash, it's best to keep these transitions a bit softer. You'll get more definition with dry brushing on top. Since the fur is never just one color, it is best to layer different colors on top of each other and slightly vary the direction of the brush strokes so that you get the rich furry texture. You see, I'm repeating the same technique with all the animals and just changed the colors and brush strokes. For the hair, I used short and thin brush strokes and less contrasting color because I want to make the fur appear shorter and softer. For the fox, I used longer strokes, and for the wild boar, very short and thin strokes just on top of her head because wild boars have very thick and short hair that lay almost completely flat against the body, except for the top of the head where the hairs stick out a bit. I painted the letters in the same way as before with blending from the lighter tone to the darkest and then added white highlights with gel pen once everything was dry. Don't use gel pen over the wet paint because it just won't stick. And especially don't use markers over the wet paint because you can even ruin the markers. For the third week, I only written the acronym for each day. This time in our language because I keep mixing the 2 or 3 languages when I learn online in foreign languages, and that spilled into my bujo, I guess. Well, it's for me and I know what it means. I added some fall leaves as a decoration on the side to finish the headers. In the center, there is another focal image, this time a squirrel. I have always loved squirrels, and fun fact, my classmates used to call me Squirrel because my pet name sounds very much like squirrel in our language, and because I've always had these big 2 front teeth. Sometimes people don't like this kind of nicknames, but I actually loved it and I still think it was fun. It's all about the perspective sometimes. Now here comes the most fun part, painting in the tail fur. The hair on the tail are long and soft and such a delight to paint. I admit I was pretty sleepy at the time, so I didn't do the best job, but it was still very enjoyable. Now I come in with another wash for the body to enrich the reddish-brown color. Watercolors tend to fade when they dry, so if you want bright colors, it's best to put on several washes, one on top of the other. Lastly, I paint in the detail like the eye and snout, because if I was to do that sooner, the dark color would bleed into other areas if they weren't finished yet. I added some shadow and texture on the bark of the tree and its annual rings. Highlights on the lettering, and let's move on. The last spread has some circles for the days, so I only wrote the initials and dates because there is not much space there. And I want to keep some for writing and some for illustration. Speaking of which, here are the fall animals. One for each day, full body this time. I started with the dormouse because they're just so adorable. Dormouse hunt actually has a very long tradition in our country. Pretty unique, unlike any other places, at least in Europe. Dormouse was a very important protein source in the Middle Ages for the poor farmers, and the skins were very precious, so the hunt was taxed. The hat made from their skins is called pouhoka, and in some places in our country man still makes them, and the hunting is still a tradition. We were actually invited to tag along on a hunt, but we didn't go because I don't think we wouldn't be sad looking at those little cuties dead. I know the cycle of life and so on, but these animals are so small and nowadays we can get proteins from other food, so I leave the tradition to those who want to carry it further. At least the larger dormouse that is hunted here is not endangered. In the meanwhile, I'm painting the base layer for the wolf howling at the moon and the fox jumping over who knows what. And of course another squirrel peeking from the tree. The wild boar and roe deer got a brown wash. Now that the base layer is dry, we can finish it off. For the owl, I first added shading on the body and bases of the wings with reddish brown, and then I carried on with a more desaturated grayish brown for the wings and the tail. Lastly, I mixed a bit more saturated and darker brown for the markings on the feathers and added eyes and beak with black. For the boar, I just added some texture to her coat and especially upper edges when the hair sticks out a bit. Pretty much the same on the roe deer, I just varied the colors a little bit more. For the squirrel, we only see the head and one leg because she's peeking from the tree, but I follow the same steps as in the focal image on the previous page. Same for the tree bark. You can see that I first painted in the letters and numbers and then added the illustration. That was on purpose because it's always best to start with lighter colors so that the darker ones don't bleed into it when you touch them accidentally while painting around them. I added fur on the fox and the wolf and started painting in the background circles. I used much diluted paints for this because I will write over this and also I want the illustration to stand out. I first tried painting just a flat color, but that looked too artificial, so I decided to vary it a little bit. Now here's the final flip through. Sorry if you're not old enough to have this melody in your ear, but whenever I say the final whatever, this song just pops in my head. I'm weird, I know. If you'd like to feel more normal, subscribe and stick with me because it's all about comparison and perspective. The weirder I am, the more normal you are. And while you're down there, hit the like for all the fall animals. I hope to see you next week when I'll show you how to bring nature inside in your comfortably warm room. See you next Friday. Bye bye.